One thing that always fascinated me as a kid who played video games was flipping through gaming magazines and seeing write-ups and ads for the games that came to numerous platforms. I had an Atari 2600 like most of us did, but seeing that games I enjoyed were also coming out on systems I rarely got to play, like the Intellivision, Colecovision, and home computers, always made me jealous because, in the case of arcade ports especially, most if not all of those were going to be better looking and sounding than the Atari version. Whoa, that version looks like the arcade game. Wow, that version has speech. It was a constant source of envy. When I went through the games on the first Taito Milestones compilation recently, that got me thinking about all this again. And thankfully it's now easier than ever to finally check out all the different versions of a game. But today what I'm curious about is an arcade game like Taito's Frontline, a game with such a unique control scheme that you would think it would be difficult to translate that to home computers and consoles, most of which use joysticks with only one button. And yet Frontline was ported to over half a dozen systems. If you don't remember, here's what's interesting about Frontline's arcade controls. You have a dedicated joystick for movement and a dedicated button to launch grenades. But then you have a bulky metal knob that you rotate to aim and push in to fire your gun. It's kinda nuts that this exists. It's not entirely fun to play in retrospect, but it's certainly unique. Now this video is really more of an expedition than a review, so there's two things to keep in mind here. One, I don't really think Frontline is a great game. It's not one of my favorites. I'm just fascinated by its controls and how they might translate. And I like seeing how different systems handle the same game. However, two, I don't see how any home version is going to be better than the arcade version. That's true in almost all cases. But still, it will be interesting to see how this got ported to various different machines. Frontline the arcade game came out in 1982. After that, we got several conversions in 1983. Colecovision was the exclusive home console for Frontline that year, so let's check out how they dealt with it.
Frontline, the ultimate invasion on a constantly changing battlefield on Colecovision.
Now, it's important to note the Colecovision controller was a weird one with lots of options, but forget that thing because Frontline is only compatible with Coleco's Super Action Controller. Look at this thing. It's like the hilt of a sword, but instead of a sword, it's got a nub and a phone grafted onto it, and the grip is made entirely of triggers. The joystick does what you think it does in-game. That's the easy part of this. Here's where it gets tricky. The yellow button under your trigger finger fires your weapon. That makes sense. The orange button moves your aim in a clockwise direction, purple moves it counterclockwise, and blue, which is probably under your pinky finger, throws grenades and jumps you into available tanks. Absolute stark raving insanity. I didn't think any of these ports could actually be more complicated than the arcade controls, but here we are right out of the gate. The speed of your aiming movement makes your character look like they're doing some kind of magic trick in slow motion. As far as the audio and visuals go, it's a competent port, as was the tradition on the Colecovision. There are no runaway boulders like there are in the arcade game, but everything else seems pretty much intact, including the stupid way that your feet move. And you get a rendition of taps when the game ends that seems to be an exclusive bonus to the Colecovision version. The arcade version just stops, so get ready to pull that out the next time you find yourself knee-deep in some second-generation console wars. Now I'm going to jump around here in time a bit to keep things thematically neat and tidy, so let's stick to US releases and talk about the Atari 2600 version from 1984. Well, that's cute. Given the simplicity of the Atari controller, you can probably guess how these controls are going to work. Basically, you aim whichever direction you're moving, and the controller button fires your gun when you're on foot against other soldiers, but fires grenades when you're on foot in a tank zone. This, coupled with the basic nature of the system, make this one of the easiest versions of the game. Moving through the level will probably remind you of River Raid, as the symmetrical backgrounds have a slightly similar look to that Activision classic. It was what immediately popped into my mind when I booted it up. There are no landmines or boulders to deal with, and you don't run as stupidly as you do in other versions, but still, you run stupidly. You also look more like a policeman now for some reason. And I'm not sure why this is. I'd wager that someone with 2600 programming knowledge could tell me, but when you move diagonally, you move at an impressive rate of speed. It's what helps make this game easier than most other versions. Just move diagonally and you're instantly out of danger. Frontline was a bigger hit in Japan than it was here in the States, and was released on 3 major computer platforms there between 1983 and 1985. Now, these are a bit tricky to navigate and emulate since they're mostly Japanese exclusive machines, but I'll do what I can. And unfortunately, what I can do is limited to the Sharp X1 version, released for that Japanese computer system in 1983. At first I thought maybe I wasn't emulating this properly either, or that maybe I had some altered ROM hack version of the game, but after watching the demo and a couple of gameplay videos online, it would appear that the Sharp X1 version solved the multiple firing buttons problem by just making your character auto-fire his gun and launch a grenade simultaneously, over and over and over again. You just need to move. You'll aim whichever direction you're facing. Simple. Problem solved. Graphically, the game looks fine in still images, very similar to the arcade version in fact, even has landmines unlike the Atari version. But in motion, nope, you're never going to want to play this. The flickering sprites can give you a headache, and the jerky way the game scrolls won't help there either. And the sound is almost non-existent, even though the Sharp X1 had decent sound capability. The 1983 PC 8801 version is one I just can't get up and running properly. Luckily, however, some people here on YouTube either have working machines or have been able to get a proper emulation setup going, and so you're taking a look at their gameplay now, which is credited to them on screen. This version appears to be mostly the same as the Sharp X1 port, it just looks and sounds worse. If you're going to avoid playing the Sharp X1 version, you should definitely forget about this one as well. It's all very clicky and flickery, but again, if you saw a still image of it, you'd think it looked great. That's how magazines used to get us. Another unsuccessful emulation venture was the Fujitsu FM7 version from 1985. Again though, there's footage available to discuss. As you can see, this is the same version as the other two, but the sound is much improved. If you had a gun to your head and had to play one of these 3, this would probably be the one. But still, don't play any of these versions if you're looking for fun frontline action. But also, if you're looking for fun frontline action, you're not going to find that anywhere. But whatever, do what you like. Play these terrible ports if you want. I'm not here to stop you. I'm just saying. While popular in Japan, the MSX series of computers were also released elsewhere, and those systems got their own version of Frontline in 1984. It's actually a very decent port of the arcade game, looks and sound-wise. The scrolling, of course, is problematic, but the MSX has the selling point of a 2-button joystick, meaning that while your aim is controlled by your direction, you've got individual buttons for your gun and grenades. If you're desperate for a home computer version of Frontline, this is the one to get. The same MSX control scheme carries over to the Japanese Famicom, which got a port of Frontline in 1985. And while it never came to the US, there's nothing that would prevent anyone in the States from playing a ROM of it, as the limited text in the game is all in English. As far as the home versions go, this is the closest to the arcade game, although the color palette is different in some instances for reasons I'm unaware of. Again, there are no landmines or boulders, but everything else is pretty close. In terms of accuracy, the MSX version wins the home computer battle, but this wins both the home console debate and the best overall port. And best I can tell, this was the final port of the game released, and it was at this point that Frontline faded into semi-obscurity. However, while researching the Famicom version, I stumbled upon this. It's a reskinned version of Frontline called Hassle, where you apparently play as a fox? The gameplay is identical and the sound is the same, it's just the graphics that are completely redone. Honestly, it's not bad, it's just, I don't know, made for furries or something? Is this some obscure license I don't know anything about? I couldn't find any actual information about it, so I'm going with one of those assumptions. Or both. It's obscure furry manga. At the very least, I would like to know why there are a bunch of dead Jolly Green Giants on the battlefield during the tank section. What's that about? So while that's the end of the ports parade, we're not done here yet, because 15 years after the last home version was released, a sequel to Frontline was created for the Game Boy Color and released in 2 distinctly different flavors depending on which region you were in. In Japan, the game is called Frontline: The Next Mission, and it plays more like Commando than Frontline, honestly. The whole gun, grenades, and tanks gameplay is there, it just feels more like the games that Frontline inspired. I mean, that's a good thing, as this is much more fun to play through. If you want to make a bunch of fun games like Commando, you can call them whatever you want, for all I care. In the US, though, the game was granted a DC Comics license and was rebranded Sergeant Rock on the Frontline. Overall, the game is mostly the same. You're wearing green now instead of blue. The cutscenes feature slightly altered graphics, and the game over screen is less morbid than the Japanese game. Other than that, they appear to be the same thing, and again, it's totally fine. Probably the most fun versions of Frontline there are. Years after that, the original arcade game would appear in compilations on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and eventually the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch. In Japan, the Famicom version was available on the virtual consoles of both the Wii and the 3DS. So what have we learned here? Nothing, really, except that the arcade control scheme for Frontline was unnecessary, as every home version managed to simplify it save for the Colecovision version, which is some kind of insane torture test. The Atari version is the easiest to play, and the Famicom game is the best overall port, while the sequels on the Game Boy Color are totally fine. While I think that gaming right now today is better than it's ever been, I'll admit I miss this era where you could get 6 different versions of a game at home, and they're all completely different in some way. Accuracy is great and all, but there's something to be said for the "we're doing the best we can with what we have, hope you like it" mentality of this era. Anyway, that's it for today. If you like this kind of thing, please let me know in the comments section, as this was a lot of fun to put together, and I would enjoy doing more of it if you're into that. So yeah, let me know down below what you think. I would really enjoy doing more of these, and until next time, let's play some games. With the Super Action Controller, yeah! Alright, let's move this and squeeze, and alright, I'm shooting, and yeah, look at me rotate. I'm moving the thing, and now I'm moving this joint and punch 9, and okay.